My name is Sienna, 33 years old, and until tonight I was the invisible force keeping my family from total financial ruin. Stay in the kitchen, your sister has the face for the investors my father commanded at the grand opening of the upscale Manhattan restaurant I built entirely from scratch. I did not scream or argue. I simply untied my apron, walked out the service doors, and drove into the night. Shortly after the lead investor rose in the crowded dining room, announced that the Michelin-trained chef he came to fund had just resigned and tore his $7 million check into tiny pieces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives who tried to steal your light. The heat inside the kitchen of the Gilded Apron was absolutely suffocating. It was opening night, and the Manhattan elite filled the dining room, waiting to taste the menu I spent 2 grueling years perfecting in Paris. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my forearm and quickly intercepted a hot pan from a panicking line cook. The young man was about to burn the brown butter for our signature scallop appetizer. I took the handle, lowered the heat, and whisked the sauce until it smelled perfectly like toasted hazelnuts. I was the executive chef, the recipe creator, and the absolute only reason this establishment was not burning to the ground. Melanie had insisted on hiring her lazy friends to staff the line to save money, leaving me to manage a crew of complete amateurs. Smoke billowed from the grill station, order tickets printed endlessly from the machine, and the sheer volume of guests threatened to drown us. But I was totally in my element. I managed the chaos, plating dishes with surgical precision, pushing my tired body to its absolute limit because this restaurant was supposed to be my ultimate legacy. My parents poured their retirement savings into the lease, but I was the one bleeding onto the cutting boards every day. Suddenly, the swinging kitchen doors violently crashed open. My father Richard stormed in wearing a custom Italian suit that cost more than my entire culinary school tuition. He did not ask how the dinner service was going. He did not thank me for working a 14-hour shift to ensure everything was perfect. Instead, he looked at my flour-stained chef coat and scowled in pure disgust. "Sienna, what on earth is wrong with your hair?" he barked loudly, making sure the entire staff heard his voice. "You look like you just crawled out of a filthy dumpster. Go wash your face immediately. The dining room is full of billionaires, and you are out here sweating like a common street laborer." I carefully placed a pair of plating tweezers down on the stainless steel counter and looked at him. "I am sweating because I am cooking for 300 people, Dad. The blackberry reduction for the duck needs my constant attention, and half the cooks Melanie hired do not even know how to properly hold a chef knife." Richard stepped closer, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Do not dare blame your sister for your own incompetence. Melanie is out there right now charming Preston Cole, the single most important venture capitalist in New York City. She is securing our financial future while you are just playing in the grease. I need you to stay out of sight tonight. You are entirely unpresentable for high society." The profound disrespect was not entirely new, but tonight it felt like a sharp physical blow to my chest. I had spent years being the family scapegoat, the quiet workhorse tucked away while my parents openly allowed my sister to claim all my hard-earned achievements. Richard aggressively pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "Your sister is the true face of this brand. She has the business degree and the elegance to properly handle the wealthy investors. You are just the hands making the food. Stay in the kitchen, do not come out, and do not ruin Melanie's big moment." He turned around and pushed back through the swinging wooden doors, leaving a heavy, toxic silence in his wake. The young line cook stared at me in shock, waiting to see my reaction. The ticket machine kept screaming, spitting out another dozen complex orders. I looked at the perfectly plated dishes, the sauces I developed from scratch, and the hard-earned grease on my tired hands. I realized in that exact moment that my family did not see me as a beloved daughter or a brilliant chef. They simply saw me as an appliance to hide in the dark. Before I could even process the sting of my father's words, the heavy metal doors swung open again. This time it was Melanie. She glided into the chaotic, grease-stained kitchen, looking like she was walking down a runway in Milan. She was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald silk gown. She even had the audacity to pair it with crystal-embellished heels that cost more than my entire monthly salary. Those shoes were completely impractical for a slippery commercial kitchen floor, but she did not care. She walked with an arrogant swagger that demanded absolute attention from everyone around her. I recognized the designer immediately. It was a $4,000 dress, and I knew exactly how she paid for it. That money had been siphoned directly from the small business loan we took out to buy our commercial-grade ovens. While I was scrubbing floors and negotiating with wholesale seafood vendors at 4 in the morning, Melanie was apparently shopping on Fifth Avenue on the restaurant's dime. The line cooks stopped what they were doing and stared at her. She looked entirely out of place among the stainless steel prep tables and the frantic energy of a working kitchen. She did not even acknowledge the staff. Her eyes locked onto me and she offered a condescending, perfectly glossed smile. She walked over to the expediting station where I was finishing the plating for our pan-seared halibut. Melanie leaned over, careful not to let the silk of her dress touch the counter, and stared critically at the saffron-infused beurre blanc I had just delicately drizzled over the fish. "This looks terrible, Sienna," she said, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "The sauce is completely separated. It looks like yellow water. Remake it immediately." I stared at her in utter disbelief. "Melanie, that is a perfectly emulsified beurre blanc. The saffron threads give it that golden color, and it holds its shape exactly as it is supposed to. It is the exact technique I learned at Le Maurice in Paris." She rolled her eyes, completely uninterested in my culinary expertise. "I do not care what they do in France," she snapped sharply. "It does not look appetizing. Make something thicker and whiter, like ranch dressing or something. I need everything to be absolutely flawless tonight. You are going to ruin my big moment with this pretentious garbage." I gripped the edge of the metal counter so tightly, my knuckles turned white. "Your big moment?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low so the rest of the kitchen would not hear. "Yes, my big moment," Melanie replied loudly, making sure everyone did hear. "Sterling Vance is sitting at table 4 right now. He is the most powerful hospitality investor in the country, and he is ready to write a $7 million check tonight to take this restaurant national. I am going out there to present the menu to him. I am going to walk him through the flavor profiles, the inspiration behind the dishes, and the vision for the brand." I slowly let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You do not even know the difference between a shallot and an onion, Melanie. How exactly are you going to explain the flavor profiles to a legendary investor?" She smiled again, that same infuriating, smug expression. "Because I have the business degree, and I have the face that sells the brand. Nobody wants to invest millions of dollars into a sweaty, exhausted girl who looks like she has not slept in a week." My father suddenly reappeared behind her, placing a proud, supportive hand on Melanie's shoulder. "Listen to your sister Sienna," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We agreed that she would be the front-facing CEO of this operation. Mr. Vance wants to see a poised, polished executive leading his investment, not a messy cook. Melanie will take the credit for the menu concept tonight. It is the only way we are going to secure that $7 million check. You just keep the food coming out hot and on time." I looked back and forth between the two of them. My own father and sister were standing in the kitchen I designed, demanding I hand over my life's work so they could secure millions of dollars under false pretenses. They had used my resume, my Michelin training, and my blood, sweat, and tears to lure in a billionaire investor, only to push me into the shadows the second the money was on the table. Richard leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "Stay hidden, Sienna. I am not asking you. I am explicitly telling you. Do your job, keep your mouth shut, and let your sister secure our family's financial future tonight." I stared into my father's eyes, searching for even a flicker of parental warmth or basic human respect. There was absolutely nothing there, just cold, calculating greed. He looked at me the way a factory owner looks at a broken machine. For 33 years, I had bent over backward to earn their approval. I endured the constant comparisons to Melanie, the blatant favoritism, and the endless demands on my time and talent. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I built something truly magnificent like this restaurant, they would finally see me. They would finally be proud of me. But standing in the sweltering heat of that kitchen, listening to the roar of the dining room outside, a profound and chilling clarity suddenly washed over me. The anxiety that had been gripping my chest all night completely evaporated, replaced by an icy, absolute calm. They did not want a daughter, they wanted a ghost. I did not yell. I did not throw the expensive plating tweezers across the room, or break down into hysterical tears like Melanie would have done. I simply took a step back from the stainless steel prep counter. I reached up to the collar of my pristine white chef coat, the one I had custom embroidered with my initials when I graduated at the top of my class in Paris. I unfastened the top button, then the second, then the third. Richard frowned, his aggressive posture faltering slightly. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice losing some of its sharp edge. "Stop playing around, Sienna. The main dinner rush is starting in 10 minutes, and we need those duck entrees fired immediately." I ignored him. I slipped my arms out of the heavy cotton coat and tossed it carelessly onto the counter right next to the delicate saffron sauce Melanie had just insulted. Underneath, I was wearing a simple black t-shirt drenched in the sweat of my own hard work. Next, I reached behind my back and untied the thick canvas apron wrapped securely around my waist. The heavy knot gave way, and I let the apron slip from my tired fingers. It hit the floor with a soft, definitive thud. The entire kitchen went completely silent. The line cooks stopped chopping. The dishwashers turned off the industrial sprayers. The only sound left was the relentless ticking of the order printer spitting out more tickets. Melanie took a step back, her designer heels slipping slightly on the greasy floor. Her smug smile vanished entirely, replaced by a look of genuine panic. "Sienna, put that apron back on right now," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. "You cannot throw a temper tantrum tonight. Sterling Vance is out there waiting." I looked directly at my sister, taking in her ridiculous $4,000 gown and her complete lack of culinary knowledge. "You wanted the spotlight, Melanie. It is all yours." I reached under the prep station and grabbed my worn leather messenger bag. I slung it over my shoulder and looked back at my father, whose face had now drained of all color. "You want to be the face of this restaurant?" I said, my voice perfectly steady and loud enough for the entire staff to hear clearly. "Then you better learn how to cook fast, because you are not going to survive the appetizer course without me. The truffle foam for the Wagyu beef needs to be aerated in exactly 7 minutes, or it will collapse into a watery mess. The sea bass needs to be pulled from the oven in 90 seconds, or it will be dry and inedible. And that separated sauce you hate so much. Good luck fixing it with your shiny business degree." Richard stepped forward, raising his hand as if to physically stop me. "You cannot leave us like this," he yelled, total panic finally setting in. "We have a contract. You owe this family." "I do not owe you a single thing," I replied coldly. "I built this kitchen, and now I am walking out of it forever. Tell Mr. Vance the chef says bon appetit." Without waiting for another word, I turned my back on them and walked straight toward the heavy metal delivery doors at the back of the kitchen. I pushed the crash bar and the door flew open, letting in a blast of cool, crisp New York City night air. I stepped out into the dark alleyway, leaving the oppressive heat, the screaming ticket machine, and my toxic family behind. As the heavy metal door swung shut behind me, cutting off Richard's furious shouting, I took my first deep breath of actual freedom. I did not know exactly what my next move was going to be, but I knew one thing for absolute certain. The gilded apron was about to go up in flames, and I was not going to be around to extinguish the fire. The cold November wind whipped against my t-shirt. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and slammed the door shut, sealing out the kitchen noise. Before I could even put the keys in the ignition, the glowing screen of my phone lit up the dark cabin. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dark. It was Andre, Melanie's husband, and my brother-in-law. Andre was the financial manager for the restaurant, but more importantly, he was the only person in my entire family who ever treated me with genuine respect. I hit accept and put the phone on speaker. "Andre, I cannot go back in there." I started, my voice shaking slightly with residual anger. "I just walked out. They can serve the duck raw for all I care." "Sienna, listen to me very carefully," Andre interrupted, his deep voice hushed and frantic. "Do not go back into that kitchen. Get as far away from this building as you possibly can. I frowned, confusion temporarily overriding my anger. Where are you? Why are you whispering? I am in Richard's makeshift office downstairs. Andre replied quickly. I was supposed to be running the final payroll numbers before dinner service, but I just found the finalized investment contracts sitting on his desk. The ones he is presenting to Sterling Vance tonight. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. What about them? Andre took a sharp breath. Sienna, they cut you out, completely. The new LLC operating agreement lists Melanie as the 90% majority owner and your father holding the remaining 10%. Your name is nowhere on these documents. You are legally classified as a standard at-will employee. They are giving you zero equity in the Gilded Apron. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my hands cramped. I stared blankly through the windshield as the sheer magnitude of their betrayal crashed over me. I gave them everything, Andre. I spent 2 grueling years sleeping on a tiny cot in Paris, working 80-hour weeks just to earn those Michelin credentials. I developed every single recipe on this menu. I know, Andre said sympathetically, and that is exactly what makes this so incredibly sick. I am looking at the pitch deck they sent to Vance last month. It is plastered with your resume, your culinary awards, and your name. They used your exact credentials to get the most powerful investor in New York to walk through those doors. But the second Vance signs that $7 million check tonight, the money goes straight into an account controlled solely by Melanie. They used you as the bait, and now they are tossing you overboard. A wave of pure, unfiltered rage washed over me. It was not just about the disrespect in the kitchen anymore. This was a calculated, premeditated financial theft. My own father had orchestrated an elaborate fraud to strip me of my life's work and hand it to his golden child. Andre, I whispered, my voice turning remarkably cold. Vance is upstairs right now. He is sitting at table 4 waiting for the appetizer course. Richard just told me to stay hidden in the kitchen so Melanie could pretend she is the mastermind behind the menu concept. Andre let out a heavy sigh of disgust. Of course he did. Sienna, Melanie cannot even fry an egg. This whole operation is a massive house of cards, and Richard expects you to just quietly hold it up from the shadows. What are you going to do? I looked at the digital clock on my dashboard. It was 7:15. The main dinner rush was about to hit its absolute peak. I am not holding up their house of cards anymore, I told him firmly. I left my apron on the counter. I am in my car right now, and I am leaving. There was a brief moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low, approving chuckle from Andre. Good for you, Sienna. It is about damn time you stood up to them. But you need to be prepared. When Richard realizes you are actually gone and the kitchen starts crashing, he is going to lose his mind. He will try to blame this entire disaster on you. Let him try, I replied, reaching for the ignition. He cannot cook the food, and neither can his precious CEO daughter. I appreciate the warning, Andre. You should probably get out of that building too before the health inspector shuts it down. I will be fine, Andre said, his tone suddenly shifting to something much more serious. I have my own exit strategy to deal with tonight. Just keep your phone close, Sienna. This is going to get incredibly ugly. I ended the call with Andre dropping my phone on the passenger seat. A sharp buzz from the device shattered the quiet of my car. The screen illuminated. It was a message from Melanie. I unlocked it, expecting a frantic demand to return to the kitchen. Instead, I read pure arrogance. Thanks for prepping the food, loser, it read. I will take it from here. Do not bother coming back tomorrow. We can hire line cooks to follow your little recipe book for minimum wage. You lacked the proper vision for high society. Go find a cheap diner to flip burgers in. Sterling Vance loves me. Enjoy your drive home. I read the words twice, letting the audacity wash over me. A normal person might have broken down crying in that dark alleyway. I sacrificed my youth, social life, and mental health to build that exact menu. I burned my arms on commercial ovens to perfect the flavor profiles currently sitting on Sterling Vance's table. But as I stared at the glowing screen, I did not feel the sudden urge to cry. I did not feel sad or defeated at all. Instead, a slow, icy smile spread across my face. Melanie genuinely believed that high-end culinary art was just following a basic recipe book. She honestly thought cooking at a Michelin star level was exactly like assembling cheap furniture. She had absolutely no idea that I never actually wrote down the final steps for the signature dishes. The specific binding agent for the scallop puree, the precise resting temperature for the Wagyu beef, the exact acid balance in the vinaigrettes. None of that critical information was in the kitchen prep book. It was all locked securely inside my head. By the time I finished reading her pathetic text, they were probably already ruining the first course. I tossed the phone back onto the seat and confidently shifted the car into drive. I pulled out of the tight alley and seamlessly merged onto the busy Manhattan street. Originally, I was just going to drive straight back to my small apartment in Brooklyn, lock the heavy door, and sleep for a week. I was going to simply let them fail on their own. But Melanie Vicious' text message completely changed everything. Failing quietly on their own was not nearly enough anymore. I needed to aggressively ensure their complete financial destruction. I reached over and tapped the glowing navigation screen on my dashboard. I canceled the quiet route to Brooklyn and rapidly typed in a brand new destination. The GPS recalculated, directing me straight down toward the bustling financial district. I merged onto the fast highway, watching the glittering, massive skyline of New York City blur past my window. I was heading to the office of my corporate lawyer, David. 6 months ago, when my father first started acting secretive about the bank financing and officially excluding me from the meetings, my survival instincts kicked in. I quietly hired David, one of the most feared intellectual property attorneys in Manhattan. Together, we secretly formed a private LLC, completely under my own name. We legally trademarked the prestigious name, The Gilded Apron. We officially copyrighted every single recipe, every unique menu design, and every proprietary spice blend I ever created. Because I personally paid for the initial ingredient testing out of my own depleted savings account before the business loan ever cleared, I legally owned the intellectual property outright. My family stupidly thought I was just a naive, easily manipulated chef who only knew how to chop vegetables and stay silent. They severely underestimated my intelligence and my absolute resolve. I finally pulled into the underground parking garage of David's prestigious law firm. It was quite late, but I knew for a fact he was still upstairs working. I had texted him earlier in the afternoon to fully prepare the heavy paperwork, just in case my family actually tried to pull a stunt at the grand opening. I securely parked my car, grabbed my heavy leather bag, and walked purposefully toward the glowing glass elevators. The cold concrete floor echoed loudly with the confident sound of my leather boots. I was no longer the sweaty, flour-covered girl they arrogantly banished to the back room. As the high-speed elevator shot up toward the 50th floor, my phone aggressively buzzed again inside my bag. I did not even bother checking the glowing screen. I knew exactly what it was. The complex appetizer course had officially hit the VIP tables, and their pathetic house of cards was already collapsing. I confidently stepped out of the elevator into the pristine lobby of the expensive law firm. It was time to pull the legal trigger and burn their stolen empire straight to the absolute ground. Back at the Gilded Apron, the atmosphere in the dining room was completely electric. The heavy mahogany doors remained propped open by 2 uniformed valets, welcoming a steady stream of New York City elite. Women draped in diamonds and men in tailored bespoke suits filled the velvet booths. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the crisp white tablecloths. A string quartet played softly in the corner, almost entirely drowned out by the low hum of expensive conversations. Richard stood near the mahogany hostess stand, his chest puffed out with pride. He repeatedly checked his gold watch, waiting for the evening's single most important arrival. Then the heavy glass doors parted one final time. Sterling Vance stepped into the restaurant. He was an imposing figure, a billionaire investor known for his absolute ruthlessness in the hospitality industry. He wore a sharp, dark navy suit, without a tie, projecting an aura of quiet, immense power. He was not accompanied by an entourage, only his personal assistant, who carried a sleek leather portfolio. Richard immediately nudged Melanie, who was nervously fixing her designer dress. "Show time," he hissed quietly. "Go get our money." Melanie took a deep breath, plastered on her most brilliant practice smile, and glided across the Italian marble floor toward the entrance. "Mr. Vance," she practically purred, extending her hand. "Welcome to the Gilded Apron. I am Melanie, the CEO and creative director behind the brand. We are absolutely thrilled you could join us for our opening night." Sterling Vance accepted her hand with a firm, brief shake. His sharp eyes scanned the dining room, taking in the expensive decor before finally settling on her. "The space looks adequate, Melanie, but I do not invest in expensive light fixtures. I invest in culinary talent. Your pitch deck highlighted a very specific Michelin-trained approach to French cuisine. I am very eager to taste the vision you outlined in those documents." Melanie's smile widened, though it looked slightly rigid. "Oh, absolutely. The menu is a true reflection of my passion for elevated dining. Please let me show you to the chef table. It is our best seat in the house." She led him to a large semi-private booth near the kitchen doors, designed specifically to give VIPs a glimpse into the culinary process. As soon as Vance sat down, his assistant opened the leather portfolio, revealing a printed copy of the menu. Vance barely glanced at it. He looked directly at Melanie, who was standing beside the table, trying to look effortlessly chic. "So Melanie, tell me about your sourcing for the black truffles featured in the Wagyu dish," Vance said, his tone casual, but his eyes intensely focused. "In your initial email, you mentioned establishing a direct pipeline with a specific region in France." Melanie blinked, the perfectly glossed smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. She shifted her weight nervously in her expensive heels. "Oh yes, the truffles. They are wonderful. We get them from a very exclusive supplier. The best in the region, really. They bring such an earthy, rich flavor to the beef." Vance raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the generic answer. "Which region specifically? Périgord or Provence?" "There is a distinct difference in the harvest season and the moisture content, which directly affects how they interact with a heavy reduction sauce." Melanie swallowed hard, her mind entirely blank. She had never ordered a truffle in her life. She did not even know what a reduction sauce actually was. Périgord, I believe." "Yes, definitely Périgord. We ensure they are very fresh." "Fresh?" Vance repeated, a hint of genuine amusement crossing his features. "Melanie, winter truffles from Périgord are currently out of season. If you are serving fresh ones tonight, they are either from Australia or you are lying to me." Melanie's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable shade of red. "Right, of course. My apologies. I oversee the macro operations, so sometimes the daily sourcing details slip my mind. I assure you they are of the highest quality." Vance leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. "I see. Well, let us move to the appetizer course then. I am particularly interested in the scallop puree. Your notes emphasized a unique emulsion technique to prevent the butter from breaking under the heat of the pass. Could you elaborate on that process? I have seen many talented chefs fail to hold that specific emulsion." Melanie felt a cold sweat prick the back of her neck. The kitchen doors swung open behind her and a waiter rushed past carrying a tray of cocktails. She desperately wished she could disappear. "The emulsion," she stammered, her voice losing its confident purr. "Yes, it is very technical. We use a special blender. It makes the butter very smooth so it does not break." Sterling Vance stared at her in complete silence for a long, agonizing moment. His assistant stopped taking notes and looked up. "A special blender," Vance finally repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "That is your technical explanation." Melanie nodded frantically, completely out of her depth. "Exactly. It is highly proprietary." Vance did not smile. He simply nodded slowly. "Fascinating. Well, I look forward to tasting this proprietary blender technique. Bring out the first course, Melanie. Let us see if the food speaks louder than your explanations." Melanie ran back through the swinging metal doors into the kitchen. her arrogance completely shattered by Sterling Vance and his brutal line of questioning. She clapped her hands together frantically, her voice high and shrill. "Where is the first course? Mr. Vance is waiting, and he is already asking ridiculous questions about truffles. I need those scallop plates out in the dining room right now. Get them plated." The kitchen was in a state of absolute paralyzed chaos. The young lead-line cook she had foolishly hired for a very low salary was frantically tearing through the upper shelves above my prep station. He was tossing metal bowls and plastic containers onto the floor. "It is gone!" he yelled over the sound of the screaming ticket printer. "What is gone?" Melanie demanded, grabbing him by the shoulder of his cheap chef coat. The black leather notebook, he replied, his eyes wide with panic. Sienna took her recipe book. "And the spice containers. The jars with the toasted hazelnut dust and the dried tarragon powder are missing. We do not have the exact measurements for the scallop puree, and the butter sauce just broke again." Melanie looked at the stainless steel counter where I had left my apron. "Well, figure it out!" she shrieked, her face turning pale. "You went to culinary school. Just make a puree and sear the stupid scallops. We cannot keep a billionaire waiting. Make it look pretty." The cook scrambled in a blind panic. Without my spice blends and temperature instructions, they were completely lost. The young cook threw a handful of raw scallops onto a smoking hot pan without patting them dry first. The moisture caused the hot oil to spit, effectively boiling the seafood instead of giving it a crisp sear. Meanwhile, another cook was desperately trying to force cold butter into a hot pan of wine, watching in horror as the sauce rapidly separated into a greasy, unappetizing yellow puddle. "Just plate it!" Melanie screamed, watching the digital clock on the wall tick forward. "Wipe the edges and garnish it with something green. I do not care what it is." Waiters nervously grabbed the poorly executed plates and pushed their way back into the elegant dining room. Melanie smoothed down her expensive silk dress, took a deep breath to steady her shaking hands, and followed them out. She plastered a fake smile onto her face as she approached the VIP booth. "Here we are, Mr. Vance," Melanie announced with forced enthusiasm. "Our signature pan-seared scallops with a saffron beurre blanc and a delicate cauliflower puree. Enjoy." The waiter carefully set the heavy porcelain plate down in front of the legendary investor. Sterling Vance did not immediately pick up his fork. He sat perfectly still, staring down at the food. Even from a distance, the flaws were glaringly obvious. The scallops were pale and rubbery, lacking the crucial caramelized crust. The puree underneath them was lumpy and dense. Worst of all, the sauce Melanie had proudly announced as a beurre blanc was fully separated, pooling around the edges of the dish, like cheap, yellow cooking oil. Vance slowly picked up his heavy silver fork. He cut a small piece of the pale scallop, swiped it through the greasy sauce, and brought it to his mouth. Melanie held her breath, her manicured nails digging deep into the palms of her hands. Richard, who had been watching from across the room, took a step closer, his face tight with anxious anticipation. Vance chewed the food slowly. His expression did not change. He did not grimace, but he did not smile either. After exactly one bite, he swallowed, placed his silver fork down on the edge of the pristine white plate, and picked up his linen napkin. He dabbed his mouth and folded the napkin, placing it on the table. "Is everything to your liking?" Melanie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vance looked up at her, his dark eyes entirely devoid of warmth. "This scallop is terribly overcooked," he stated evenly, his voice carrying easily over the soft string quartet playing in the corner. "The puree is gritty, and your proprietary blender technique seems to have resulted in a completely broken, oily sauce. This is not the food of a Michelin-trained chef. This is the food of a terribly confused amateur." The nearby chatter suddenly and completely died. The surrounding tables overheard the harsh critique. The celebratory energy vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Richard frantically rushed over, his face slick with cold sweat. He opened his mouth to offer a frantic excuse to the investor, but the words completely failed him. Sterling Vance just sat there emanating cold authority, while Melanie stood entirely frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. Before the silence could stretch into absolute ruin, Andre stepped out from the shadows of the hostess stand. He had been watching the entire agonizing exchange unfold from across the elegant room. He walked smoothly toward table 4, projecting an air of calm professionalism that directly contrasted with Richard panic and Melanie complete paralysis. "Mr. Vance, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable misstep," Andre said, his deep voice steady and reassuring. He smoothly motioned for a nearby busboy to immediately clear the offending scallop plates from the pristine table. "We are experiencing an unforeseen issue with our kitchen staff tonight. Please allow me to personally arrange a different appetizer while we rectify the situation." Vance did not say a word, but he gave a slight curt nod, acknowledging Andre's competence. Andre then turned his attention to the surrounding tables, gracefully moving through the dining room. He offered complimentary bottles of expensive champagne, comped entire checks, and used his natural charisma to temporarily soothe the growing wave of angry murmurs sweeping through the restaurant. Melanie just stood frozen near the busy bar, watching her husband do the difficult job she arrogantly claimed she was born to do just moments ago. He was managing the immediate crisis perfectly, acting exactly like the skilled financial and floor manager he was hired to be. But Richard did not see a professional saving his business from total ruin. He only saw someone stealing the precious spotlight from his golden daughter. As Andre finished comping a meal for a prominent food critic at table 9, Richard suddenly grabbed him aggressively by the elbow. Richard's fingers dug painfully into the expensive fabric of Andre's tailored suit jacket. He yanked Andre forcefully away from the dining room floor and dragged him into the narrow, dimly lit hallway leading toward the private wine cellar. "What exactly do you think you are doing out there?" Richard hissed, his face twisted in an ugly sneer. His breath smelled heavily of nervous sweat and expensive scotch. Andre calmly pulled his arm out of Richard's grasp, adjusting his jacket sleeve. "I am doing damage control, Richard. Your daughter just served raw seafood and a broken sauce to a billionaire investor. I am trying to stop the entire dining room from walking out the front door and ruining our reputation." Richard's face flushed an even deeper shade of angry crimson red. "You do not speak to the VIPs, he spat, pointing a shaking finger directly at Andre's chest. "You are the accountant. You stay in the back office and crunch the numbers. I did not bring you into my family so you could parade around the dining room acting like you own the place. You are making us look desperate and weak." Andre stared at his father-in-law, his expression hardening. "I am keeping this restaurant afloat because Melanie is currently having a panic attack. Someone has to manage the floor before we lose every single customer here." Richard let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "You really think you belong out there with those people? You think wearing a nice suit suddenly erases where you came from? Let us get one thing perfectly clear right now, Andre. You only have this prestigious job because you married my daughter. You grew up in a tiny, run-down apartment in Queens with absolutely nothing. My wealthy friends are out there. The Manhattan elite are out there. You are not high society. You are just a convenient diversity hire we tolerate for corporate optics. Stop trying to play the hero. Remember your roots and know your exact place in this hierarchy." The incredibly offensive words hung heavily in the cold air of the hallway. Richard's chest heaved with angry breaths, expecting Andre to either apologize or back down defensively. Instead, a profound, eerie silence fell over Andre. He looked at Richard, truly seeing the ugly, hollow man standing in front of him. For 5 long years, Andre had quietly endured the subtle microaggressions, the condescending remarks at holiday dinners, and the constant reminders that he was an outsider. He had tolerated the endless disrespect because he truly loved Melanie and believed they were building a genuine life together. But looking at Richard now and knowing Melanie was entirely complicit in the massive financial theft against Sienna, the final veil dropped completely. Andre realized with absolute certainty that this toxic family would never view him as an equal human being. He was just another disposable tool to be used and discarded exactly like they were trying to do to Sienna tonight. He did not yell. The burning anger he felt instantly crystallized into something cold and highly functional. He realized his marriage was completely dead. There was nothing left to save here. He silently turned and walked away. While Andre was walking away from his completely toxic marriage in that dark restaurant hallway, I was sitting 50 floors above the sparkling Manhattan skyline holding a heavy gold fountain pen. The office was perfectly quiet, a sharp contrast to the screaming ticket machines and the intense heat I had just escaped. David, my corporate attorney, smoothly slid a thick stack of pristine legal documents across his polished mahogany desk. He looked at me over the rim of his wire glasses, his expression a careful mixture of professional detachment and genuine respect. "Are you absolutely sure you want to pull the trigger tonight, Sienna?" he asked quietly, folding his hands together. "Once I officially file these injunctions with the state and serve the legal notices, there is absolutely no going back. Your family will instantly lose the restaurant, the bank will recall their massive business loans, and they will face total financial ruin." I did not hesitate for a single second. I looked down at the top page of the dense legal document. The bold black letters at the top read "Revocation of Intellectual Property" and "Immediate Cease and Desist." My path to this leather chair started exactly 6 months ago. I had stayed late at the restaurant to test a new pastry dough when I accidentally overheard a private phone call between my father and his commercial real estate broker. Richard was loudly bragging in his office about how Melanie was going to easily secure the Vance funding. He explicitly explained how they were structuring the new operating agreement to completely bypass my equity. He casually called me a naive emotional workhorse who would just keep cooking as long as they threw me a modest monthly salary. The profound betrayal shattered my heart, but it also woke me up. The very next morning, I walked straight into David's office and silently set up a private holding company. I named it Ironclad Culinary LLC. Because I personally paid for the initial ingredient testing out of my own depleted savings account before the family business loan ever cleared, I was the sole legal owner of the creations. I methodically copyrighted every single recipe on the menu. I legally protected the specific ingredient measurements, the proprietary spice, blends, the unique plating designs, and even the exact brand name, the Gilded Apron. My father was so arrogantly focused on securing the bank loans against his house and hyping up Melanie that he never even bothered to check the Federal Trademark Registry. He just blindly assumed he owned me and everything my mind naturally produced. He thought my talent was his birthright. I pressed the nib of the gold pen to the thick paper and signed my full name on the dotted line. I flipped to the next page, reading the harsh legal jargon, and signed again. I was not just throwing a childish temper tantrum, I was actively and legally dismantling their entire fraudulent enterprise from the inside out. The heavy documents I was currently signing legally prohibited Richard and Melanie from serving any dish that even remotely resembled my unique creations. It legally stripped them of the right to use the restaurant name on their menus, their signage, or their lucrative investment pitch decks. Without my protected intellectual property, they were just two desperate people standing in an expensive leased room with a mountain of unpayable debt. David gathered the freshly signed documents, checked the signatures, and neatly tapped the stack against his desk. "The injunction is now legally active," he stated, checking his expensive silver watch. "I have a professional courier standing by downstairs in the lobby. We can have these legally served to your father at his home address by tomorrow morning." I shook my head, a cold, hard smile touching my lips. "Tomorrow morning is much too late, David. Sterling Vance is sitting in their dining room right this very second, eating a completely ruined, separated version of my signature scallop dish. If Vance signs that $7 million investment check tonight, he becomes legally entangled in their massive financial fraud. I will not let an innocent investor lose millions of dollars just because my family lacks basic human decency and business ethics. We are not waiting for a courier tomorrow. We are dropping the legal bomb tonight." David raised a curious eyebrow, clearly impressed by my ruthless sense of timing. How exactly do you plan to deliver a legal cease and desist in the middle of a busy dinner service? He asked, leaning back in his plush leather chair. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out my silver laptop, placing it firmly on his desk. I am not going to serve my father, I replied, flipping the screen open. I am going to serve his money. I had told David I was going to serve his money, and he simply smiled, handing me a secure, encrypted flash drive containing the digital copies of every single injunction, copyright certificate, and trademark registration we had just executed. I thanked David for his flawless legal execution, packed my heavy leather bag, and rode the high-speed elevator back down to the dimly lit underground parking garage. The cold concrete floor echoed loudly with my footsteps as I approached my parked car. I climbed into the driver's seat, shut the heavy door, and locked it. The deep silence of the concrete garage was deafening compared to the absolute chaos I knew was currently unfolding uptown at the restaurant. I did not immediately start the engine. I needed absolute focus for this next crucial step. Instead of driving away, I placed my silver laptop securely on the center console and opened the screen. The harsh blue light brightly illuminated the dark cabin of my car. I connected the laptop to my phone's cellular hotspot, watching the small wireless network icon solidify on the screen. My hands were perfectly steady. I was no longer the exhausted, flower-covered girl they had banished to the back alley. I was a completely independent business owner, executing a flawless defensive strategy. I opened my secure corporate email client and created a new blank message. Finding Sterling Vance's personal business email address was not difficult at all. Andre had discreetly forwarded it to me weeks ago when he first discovered Richard's fraudulent pitch deck, just in case I ever needed a direct line of communication to protect myself. I typed the billionaire investor's secure email address into the recipient field. Next, I carefully crafted the subject line. I needed something that would immediately cut through the inevitable noise of his busy inbox and demand his absolute attention right there at the dinner table. I typed, "The Gilded Apron Fraudulent Investment and Intellectual Property Revocation." It was cold, strictly legal, and entirely accurate. Then I clicked the small paperclip icon to begin attaching the heavy digital files. I uploaded the massive PDF of the Ironclad Operating Agreement for Ironclad Culinary, LLC, legally proving my sole ownership of the entire brand concept. I attached the high-resolution scanned copies of my authentic Michelin credentials from Paris, the exact ones Richard had illegally photocopied and plastered all over his investment pitch to lure Vance into the building. Finally, I attached the heavy, freshly signed cease and desist order that legally barred my family from serving any of my food or using the restaurant name, effective immediately. The green progress bar quickly filled across the screen as the dense files attached to the email. Now came the most critical part of the entire evening. I placed my fingers on the keyboard to compose the body of the message. I did not want to sound bitter, emotional, or vindictive like a slighted family member. I needed to sound exactly like a calculating professional CEO, protecting her incredibly valuable corporate assets. Dear Mr. Vance, I began typing rapidly in the quiet, isolated car. You are currently sitting at table 4 inside a restaurant that is operating under entirely false pretenses. The investment pitch deck you received from Richard and Melanie was built entirely on stolen intellectual property. They do not own the rights to the menu you are eating, the proprietary techniques being poorly executed in the kitchen, or even the name of the establishment itself. I am the sole legal owner of these assets, and I have attached the federal filings to unequivocally prove it. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the stale garage air. I pictured my father's cruel, demanding face when he told me I was unpresentable for high society. I pictured Melanie wearing a $4,000 silk dress, bought with the sweat equity of my ruined social life. I let my fingers hover over the glowing keys before typing the final devastating sentences. Furthermore, Melanie possesses absolutely no culinary training. I spent 2 grueling years in Paris, earning the exact credentials they are currently using to secure your $7 million investment. I refused to let an innocent investor be heavily defrauded by my family greed. The chef you came to fund just quit because she was ordered to stay in the kitchen. I have officially issued an immediate cease and desist. Do not sign that check. Sincerely, Sienna. I read the short, highly lethal email one final time, checking for any grammatical errors. It was absolutely perfect. It was the exact financial kill shot my toxic family deserved. Without a single second thought, I moved the cursor over the bright blue send button and firmly clicked the trackpad. A soft electronic sound echoed from the laptop speakers, confirming the encrypted message was instantly delivered directly to Sterling Vance's private server. I closed the laptop, leaned back against the comfortable leather headrest, and finally turned the key in the ignition. The powerful engine roared to life, filling the quiet concrete garage with a steady, reassuring hum. The absolute finality of what I had just done washed over me, bringing a profound sense of inner peace. The bomb was officially dropped. While I was sitting comfortably in my car miles away, the atmosphere inside the Gilded Apron was rapidly deteriorating. The disastrous appetizer course had left an uncomfortable tension in the dining room. Waiters rushed to clear the uneaten rubbery scallops and broken yellow butter sauce from the tables, avoiding eye contact with the patrons. The gentle music from the string quartet felt out of place against the low murmurs of the guests. But my father was not a man who ever accepted defeat. In his arrogant mind, reality was something he could easily manipulate with a public relations spin. He completely ignored the culinary disaster that had just occurred. He decided the best way to save the evening was to aggressively push forward and secure the money before Sterling Vance could ask more questions or walk out the door. Richard smoothed down the lapels of his Italian suit, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a linen napkin, and picked up a champagne flute. He grabbed a silver knife and began tapping it against the glass. The high-pitched ringing noise cut through the heavy atmosphere of the dining room. The string quartet immediately stopped playing. The low murmurs of the confused guests slowly died down as all eyes turned toward the center of the room. Richard smiled broadly, projecting a false warmth that made my skin crawl. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice booming across the silent room. "If I could please have your undivided attention for a moment." He stepped right into the center of the dining room, positioning himself perfectly under the brightest crystal chandelier so the hired press photographers could get a perfect clear shot. "Tonight is not just the grand opening of a restaurant," he continued smoothly. "Tonight is the culmination of a massive dream. It is the beginning of a brand new culinary empire right here in Manhattan. And none of this incredible luxury, none of this groundbreaking vision would be possible without the absolute genius of my beautiful daughter." Richard gestured dramatically toward the wooden bar where Melanie was desperately trying to compose herself after her humiliating interaction with the billionaire investor. Melanie took a deep breath, plastered that fake glossy smile back onto her face, and walked gracefully to join him. The designer silk gown flowed around her ankles, hiding the fact that her knees were visibly shaking. Richard wrapped a very proud arm around her bare shoulders. "Melanie has poured her absolute heart and soul into designing this exceptional menu." Richard lied effortlessly to the crowd of wealthy socialites and industry critics. "She spent years refining these unique flavor profiles. And tonight, we are incredibly honored to have Mr. Sterling Vance joining us." Richard turned his body directly toward table 4, gesturing to the silent billionaire. "We are looking forward to officially finalizing our $7 million partnership tonight, merging Melanie creative culinary genius with his legendary business acumen. Please let us raise a glass to the brilliant executive chef of the Gilded Apron, Melanie." A smattering of polite but highly confused applause rippled through the dining room. A few guests raised their glasses, but most people just stared, remembering the terrible food they had just been served. Melanie stepped forward to speak, practically glowing under the flashbulbs of the cameras. She opened her mouth, ready to deliver a hollow speech filled with corporate buzzwords about culinary innovation and female entrepreneurship. Thank you all so much, Melanie began, her voice falsely sweet and humble. Food is not just sustenance, it is an artistic journey. And my vision for this menu was to take you all on a journey of pure elegance. At that exact second, a very sharp electronic buzz cut through the quiet room. It came directly from table 4. Sterling Vance reached into the breast pocket of his tailored navy suit and pulled out his sleek smartphone. The screen was illuminated with an urgent notification. He did not ignore it. He did not wait for Melanie to finish her ridiculous speech about her fake artistic journey. He simply tapped the screen and opened the email I had just sent from the parking garage. Vance sat perfectly still as his dark eyes scanned the subject line: fraudulent investment and intellectual property revocation. The polite, annoyed expression he had been wearing all evening instantly vanished. It was replaced by a look of absolute fury. He quickly tapped the attachment, scrolling past the company documents and resting on the high-resolution scans of my Michelin credentials from Paris. He read my words. The chef you came to fund just quit because she was ordered to stay in the kitchen. Melanie kept on talking, completely oblivious to the massive bomb that had just detonated on the table right in front of her. Melanie was mid-sentence, passionately describing the fake emotional depth of her culinary inspiration, when the heavy leather chair at table 4 scraped loudly against the polished Italian marble floor. The harsh sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent dining room. Sterling Vance stood up to his full imposing height. He did not pick up a champagne flute to join the toast. He did not clap. He bypassed his leather portfolio completely and held only his glowing smartphone in his right hand. The hired press photographers instinctively lowered their heavy cameras. The polite, forced smiles of the wealthy patrons slowly vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable collective breath-holding. Melanie abruptly stopped talking. Her perfectly rehearsed speech died in her throat as the billionaire investor walked with terrifying predatory purpose directly toward the center of the dining room where she stood. Vance did not look like a man about to hand over a massive financial investment. He looked like an executioner stepping up to the block. He stopped less than 2 feet away from Melanie. The expensive silk of her designer gown trembled as her entire body began to shake. "You speak incredibly well," Melanie Vance said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth, but loud enough for every single person in the room to hear. "You have memorized a very impressive corporate script. But since we are celebrating your creative genius tonight, let us skip the marketing buzzwords and talk about the actual food. I have 3 very basic questions for you. Since you designed this incredibly complex French-inspired menu, this should be effortless. Name the 5 traditional French mother sauces." Melanie's face drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen white. The heavy crystal chandeliers suddenly seemed too bright, the room completely suffocating. "The 5 sauces," she repeated, her voice cracking embarrassingly. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for any possible escape route. She looked desperately at Richard, who was standing frozen just a few feet away, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. "Well, Mr. Vance, as an executive chef, I focus more on the modern interpretations rather than the ancient traditional rules. We use a lot of reductions and, of course, the proprietary blender techniques I mentioned earlier." Vance did not even blink. "That is a very creative way of saying you have absolutely no idea what I am talking about," he replied coldly. "Let us try something much simpler. Your main course tonight features a duck confit. Please explain the exact difference between a confit and a standard sear. Which specific fat are you using for the confit in the kitchen right now? And at what precise temperature does the protein properly break down without drying out the meat?" The silence in the dining room became incredibly oppressive. You could hear a pin drop. Melanie swallowed hard, her manicured hands gripping the microphone stand like a life raft. "The confit," she stammered, sweat visibly forming on her forehead and ruining her flawless makeup. "We sear the duck in a very hot pan, with butter, very hot butter, and then we roast it until it is crispy." Richard tried to step forward, holding up his hands in a frantic, pacifying gesture. "Sterling, please, my daughter is just overwhelmed by the cameras and the excitement of the evening. Let us go back to the table and discuss the financials." Vance snapped his head toward my father, raising a single finger that stopped Richard dead in his tracks. I am speaking to the creative genius, Richard. Do not interrupt her. Vance turned his dark, unforgiving eyes back to my sister. Confit is a slow cooking method involving the animal-own rendered fat, not a high-heat sear with butter, he corrected her brutally. I will give you one final, extremely simple chance, Melanie. What is a mirepoix? It is the absolute foundational base of almost every savory dish you serve tonight. It consists of 3 simple vegetables. Name them for me right now. Melanie was openly hyperventilating. The confident, arrogant woman who had banished me to the alleyway was completely gone. In her place stood a terrified fraud exposed beneath the glaring lights of high society. She squeezed her eyes shut and guessed blindly. Onions, she blurted out, garlic, and peppers. Green peppers. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. Several prominent food critics sitting near the front row actually groaned aloud in second-hand embarrassment. Even enthusiastic home cooks knew a traditional French mirepoix consisted solely of onions, carrots, and celery. The illusion was completely shattered. The entire room watched the arrogant CEO utterly unravel in real time. Sterling Vance looked down at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked at the glowing screen of his smartphone, then back up at the silent, shocked crowd. The reason Melanie cannot answer these fundamental culinary questions, Vance announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority, is because she has never cooked a professional meal in her entire life. This entire restaurant is a massive, carefully orchestrated lie. Richard lunged forward, desperation clawing at his pristine image. Sterling, please, he begged, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Do not do this here. We can go into the back office and explain everything. It is just a minor familial misunderstanding. Vance did not even look at him. He kept his piercing gaze locked on the silent, captivated audience of New York elite food critics and wealthy patrons. A minor familial misunderstanding, Vance echoed, his voice laced with heavy sarcasm. No, Richard. A misunderstanding is a simple scheduling error. What you have done here is commit blatant corporate fraud. And I prefer to handle fraudulent individuals in the exact public spotlight they so desperately crave. Vance raised his sleek smartphone higher, adjusting his glasses. I just received a very illuminating email from the actual talent behind this establishment, he announced to the crowd. The real executive chef, the woman whose authentic Michelin credentials you illegally photocopied and glued to your ridiculous pitch deck. Her name is Sienna. And according to the federal injunction she just legally filed, she is the sole owner of every single recipe, every proprietary technique, and even the very name of this restaurant. Richard let out a choked gasp, all the blood completely draining from his face, as the brutal reality of my legal strike hit him. Melanie swayed on her designer heels, looking like she might actually faint right there on the expensive Italian marble floor. Vance looked down at the glowing screen and began to read my exact words aloud, his baritone voice projecting clearly across the mahogany tables. A harsh collective wave of whispers erupted from the wealthy patrons. The prominent food critics sitting in the front row rapidly pulled out their own smartphones, furiously typing notes and drafting headlines. The grand opening of the year was instantly turning into the massive scandal of the decade. Vance held up a hand demanding immediate silence, and the room instantly obeyed. He continued reading. Furthermore, Melanie possesses absolutely no culinary training. I spent 2 grueling years in Paris earning the exact credentials they are currently using to secure your $7 million investment. I refuse to let an innocent investor be heavily defrauded by my family greed. Vance lowered the phone and looked directly at my father. You sat in my corporate office exactly 3 weeks ago, Richard. You looked me directly in the eye and swore on your professional reputation that your daughter Melanie was the sole visionary behind this brand. You assured my entire investment board that she trained extensively in Paris. You requested $7 million of my capital based on a completely fabricated resume. You thought I was just a wealthy wallet you could easily manipulate. You thought you could hide the true architect of this menu in the shadows while parading an absolute amateur in front of the cameras. Richard opened his mouth to defend himself, but nothing came out. He was completely trapped in his own web of arrogance and lies. He looked desperately at the press cameras, the very same cameras he had arrogantly invited to capture his ultimate triumph, now documenting his total public ruin. Vance turned his attention back to the captivated dining room. The terrible, rubbery scallops you all just attempted to eat, the completely broken butter sauces, the chaotic delay in the kitchen. That is not the work of a nervous staff on opening night. That is the inevitable result of an arrogant family who banished their actual talent out the back door just to stroke the fragile ego of a golden child. Sienna just informed me that she quit tonight because she was ordered to stay hidden in the filthy kitchen so Melanie could play dress-up. The sheer embarrassment in the room was thick and palpable. The elite patrons looked down at their plates in absolute disgust, realizing they had been served a cheap, fraudulent imitation of fine dining. "You have no intellectual property," Richard Vance declared, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. "You have no head chef, you have no menu, and you certainly have absolutely no business ethics. The legal injunction Sienna just served means you cannot legally serve another piece of food in this building under this brand. You invited us all here to celebrate your massive success, but the only thing we are witnessing tonight is your complete and utter financial suicide." The illusion of the wealthy, successful family was totally shattered, leaving only the ugly truth exposed for the entire city to witness. Richard broke the suffocating silence of the dining room, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic edge. "Sterling, please, you have to listen to reason," he pleaded, taking a step toward the imposing billionaire. "You cannot seriously believe a single word of that ridiculous, fabricated email. Sienna is not a Michelin-trained executive chef. She is just a deeply disgruntled, emotionally unstable former employee. She was a low-level line cook we officially fired this morning for severe insubordination and attempting to steal expensive kitchen supplies. She has always been highly jealous of her sister's immense success. She is just trying to extort our family for a quick, unearned payout to ruin this beautiful evening. We own every single asset in this building. I have the official bank paperwork and the corporate operating agreements sitting directly on the desk in my private office downstairs. Let us just step away from these flashing cameras, go to the back room, pour a glass of my aged scotch, and I will show you the real documents." He was sweating profusely, heavy drops rolling down his forehead. His custom-tailored suit suddenly looked entirely too large for his rapidly deflating ego. He reached out to touch Vance on the arm, a remarkably foolish attempt at asserting wealthy camaraderie and regaining control of the narrative. Vance sidestepped Richard, reaching hand, moving away as if avoiding a contagious disease. "Do not dare touch me, Richard," he commanded, his voice slicing through the tension in the room like a cold steel blade. "I do not drink scotch with pathetic liars, and I certainly do not conduct business deals hidden away in dark back rooms. You honestly think I am a naive fool? You think a woman who just successfully filed a federal intellectual property injunction with David Kensington, one of the most ruthless and respected corporate attorneys in all of Manhattan, is just a low-level line cook throwing a childish tantrum? I had my legal team verify the federal filing the second I finished reading her email. The trademark registration is completely real. The cease and desist injunction is legally active as of this very moment. You own absolutely nothing but a massive mountain of commercial debt." Vance reached deliberately inside the breast pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket. He slowly withdrew a crisp, rectangular piece of watermarked paper. It was the certified cashier check. The $7 million initial investment that Richard had practically mortgaged his entire soul and family home to secure. The entire dining room stared fixedly at the small piece of paper. Richard's eyes widened with ravenous, desperate hunger while Melanie let out a small, pathetic whimper of pure terror. "I did not build a multi-billion-dollar hospitality empire by handing my capital over to incompetent thieves," Vance stated firmly, holding the heavy check up high so the hired press photographers could get a perfectly clear, undeniable shot. "In this specific high-end industry, absolute trust is the only currency that actually matters. A chef word is their absolute bond. You promised me culinary excellence, and instead you delivered a fraudulent, embarrassing circus. You built this entire luxurious facade on the broken back and stolen talent of your own daughter, and then you arrogantly thought you could bury her in a filthy kitchen while you casually cashed my check. That profound moral bankruptcy is a liability I will never tolerate in my portfolio. You are not a savvy businessman, Richard. You are a common con artist wearing an expensive suit, and Melanie is nothing but an empty mannequin playing dress-up with stolen money. Richard opened his mouth to protest again, desperately trying to salvage the situation, but Vance did not give him the chance to speak another lie. The billionaire gripped the edges of the heavy paper check firmly with both hands. With deliberate, agonizingly slow precision, he tore the $7 million check straight down the middle. The sharp ripping sound echoed loudly in the totally silent dining room. Richard let out a visceral, agonizing gasp, looking exactly as if Vance had just physically stabbed him in the chest. Vance placed the two torn halves together and tore them again. Then he tore them a third time, completely reducing the massive fortune into useless, jagged scraps of paper. He extended his hand directly over Melanie's shaking feet. He slowly opened his fingers, letting the torn pieces of the ruined check flutter through the air like falling snow. They landed softly on her ridiculous $4,000 crystal-embellished designer shoes. "Consider my investment officially withdrawn," Vance announced coldly. "I highly suggest you tell your wealthy patrons to find somewhere else to eat tonight because I am calling the health department to report your kitchen on my way out." The torn pieces of the $7 million check rested silently on Melanie's crystal-embellished shoes like discarded confetti. Richard was entirely frozen in place, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He looked exactly like a suffocating fish, pulled violently from the water. The absolute finality of Sterling Vance withdrawing his investment and threatening a health department inspection had completely broken my father's mind. Before Richard could even attempt to drop to his knees and beg, the confident sound of leather dress shoes echoed across the cold Italian marble floor. Andre stepped out from the dim shadows of the hallway. His tailored suit was perfectly buttoned and his posture was rigidly straight. He walked with a calm, deliberate purpose that immediately drew the attention of every single person still lingering in the shocked dining room. He bypassed Richard entirely and walked straight up to Melanie. She looked up at her husband, tears finally spilling over her heavily mascaraed eyelashes, completely ruining her flawless makeup. "Andre," she sobbed, reaching a shaking hand out toward him. "Please help me fix this. Tell Mr. Vance this is a misunderstanding." Andre did not reach out to hold her hand. He stopped a full foot away from her, his expression entirely devoid of the warmth and patience he had shown her for the past 5 years. "I am not fixing anything for you ever again," Melanie Andre stated, his deep voice carrying clearly to the eager ears of the press. "I just spent the last hour trying to save your reputation on the floor. But hearing Mr. Vance read Sienna's email just confirmed everything I discovered in your father's office tonight. You actively conspired with him to steal your sister's life work. You are a complete fraud, and I refuse to spend another second married to one. I am officially filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning. My own lawyer will contact yours." Melanie let out a piercing wail, physically recoiling. She collapsed onto a nearby dining chair, burying her face in her hands. The wealthy patrons gasped, completely mesmerized by the spectacular destruction of this arrogant family. Richard finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He lunged toward Andre, his fists clenched tightly. "How dare you!" Richard screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You ungrateful parasite! I brought you into high society. You are nothing without this family. I will completely ruin you. I will make sure you never work in finance in this city ever again." Andre did not flinch. He simply looked at Richard with a cold, calculating pity. "You cannot ruin me," Richard Andre replied evenly, "because you do not actually have any power. You do not have any money, and as of tonight you do not even have a restaurant." Andre smoothly turned his back on my screaming father and faced Sterling Vance. The billionaire investor was watching the exchange with intense interest. Andre reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. He held it out toward Vance. "Mr. Vance," Andre said respectfully. "My name is Andre, and until 5 minutes ago I was the chief financial officer for this fraudulent establishment. You just saved yourself a $7 million loss, but the authorities need to know exactly how deep this deception goes. This flash drive contains the unredacted financial ledgers, the hidden bank statements, and the original loan agreements Richard signed last month." Vance raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He took the silver flash drive from Andre. "And what exactly will I find on these ledgers, Andre?" "You will find irrefutable proof of massive financial embezzlement," Andre declared loudly, ensuring the entire room heard him. Richard did not just steal Sienna's intellectual property. He used the massive small business loans secured for this restaurant to illegally pay off his own crippling personal debts. He used corporate funds to settle gambling markers, buy luxury cars, and purchase Melanie's designer wardrobe. The Gilded Apron was never actually capitalized to succeed. It was a scheme designed to drain your investment capital to cover his secret bankruptcies. "I have already forwarded a complete digital copy of this drive to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Fraud Division." The heavy silence that followed Andre's declaration was absolute. The food critics frantically typed the final nails into Richard's coffin. Richard stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a mahogany table. His arrogant facade was completely obliterated by the crushing weight of federal prison time. Vance slipped the silver flash drive into his pocket, giving Andre a firm, respectful nod. "I appreciate your integrity," Andre, Vance said quietly. "When the dust settles from this spectacular mess, give my executive office a call. I am always looking for honest financial officers." With that final devastating offer, Sterling Vance turned his back on my shattered family and walked out of the dining room. He did not look back. His personal assistant followed closely behind the heavy glass doors swinging shut with a definitive thud that seemed to echo through the expansive space. That sound was the starting gun for the absolute destruction of the Gilded Apron. The spell holding the dining room hostage instantly broke. The prominent food critics sitting in the front row did not even bother asking for their coats. They were already furiously tapping on their glowing screens. Within seconds, the first devastating tweet hit the internet. It was from the senior dining editor of the city's most prestigious lifestyle magazine. "The grand opening of the Gilded Apron is a spectacular, fraudulent disaster," the post read. "The so-called executive chef cannot identify a basic mirepoix. The investor publicly tore up a $7 million check, and the CFO just accused the owner of massive federal embezzlement. Do not eat here." The tweet went viral locally almost instantly. I knew this because my own phone, sitting safely on the passenger seat of my car miles away, began lighting up with notifications from industry friends, tagging me in the rapidly spreading news. Inside the restaurant, the wealthy patrons read the live updates on their phones. The sheer social embarrassment of being associated with such a monumental public scam was entirely too much for the Manhattan elite. They operated on reputation, and Richard's reputation was currently burning to the ground in real time. A wealthy socialite sitting near the back stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. She grabbed her designer clutch and practically sprinted toward the exit. Her sudden movement triggered a massive avalanche. Entire tables stood up in unison. Husbands grabbed their wives' elbows, ushering them away from the contaminated scene. The delicate string quartet, sensing the intense danger and realizing they were definitely not getting paid for the gig, quietly packed their expensive instruments and slipped out the side door. Richard frantically scrambled to block the main exit, his arms spread wide in a desperate, pathetic attempt to trap his fleeing audience. "Please wait," he pleaded, his voice cracking horribly. "Do not leave. Dinner is on the house tonight. We are going to serve a magnificent dessert course. Just sit down and let us explain the situation." Nobody listened to him. A prominent real estate developer physically shoved Richard out of the way, glaring at him with pure disgust. "Get out of my way," Richard, the developer, growled aggressively. "You are completely finished in this city. You will be lucky if you do not spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary. Richard stumbled into a decorative floral arrangement, knocking a heavy crystal vase to the floor. It shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, mirroring his completely destroyed ambitions. Melanie remained entirely frozen in her chair, her face buried in her trembling hands. She sobbed loudly, crying for her ruined social status, her lost wealth, and the terrifying reality of her impending divorce. Not a single person stopped to comfort her. They walked right past her crying form, treating her like absolute poison. In less than 5 agonizing minutes, the massive, luxurious dining room was completely empty of patrons. The only things left were half-eaten plates of rubbery scallops, spilled champagne, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixing with cold panic. Then the swinging metal doors leading to the kitchen slowly pushed open. The young, inexperienced line cooks Melanie had hired stepped cautiously into the dining room. They were still wearing their flour-stained aprons, completely confused by the sudden, eerie silence. They had watched the entire disaster unfold through the small circular windows of the kitchen doors. The young lead cook walked up to Richard, who was kneeling on the floor, absent-mindedly picking up pieces of the shattered crystal vase. "Are we still cooking the main course?" the young cook asked hesitantly, wiping his greasy hands on his apron. Richard did not answer. He just stared blankly at the wall. The cook looked at Melanie, then around the completely abandoned restaurant. "Listen, man." The cook continued, his tone shifting from confused to deeply concerned. "We saw that rich guy tear up the big check. We heard what the accountant said about the stolen money. We all worked a 14-hour shift today setting up this kitchen. We need to know right now how we are getting paid." Richard finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "Paid," he whispered weakly, treating the concept like a foreign language. The staff exchanged angry glances, realizing the wealthy captain had no life rafts. The restaurant was now completely, absolutely dead. The devastating reality of the previous night truly crystallized when the sun finally rose over Manhattan. The morning light offered no comfort, only the harsh glare of undeniable ruin. Inside Richard's sprawling multi-million-dollar colonial home in the suburbs, the silence was broken by the relentless, piercing ringing of telephones. It started at exactly 8 in the morning and did not stop. Melanie, who had spent the entire night sobbing uncontrollably on her childhood bed, ignored her buzzing phone, burying her face deeper into a tear-soaked pillow. Richard, however, sat frozen in his dark mahogany study, staring blankly at the blinking lights on his multi-line office phone. He looked 10 years older, his expensive suit wrinkled and smelling faintly of stale sweat and panic. The first few calls were from enraged private investors who had caught wind of Sterling Vance's highly public exit and the viral tweets from the food critics. They were aggressively demanding immediate reassurance that their smaller seed investments were secure. Richard did not answer a single one of them. He knew exactly what he had done with their money, and he knew it was entirely gone. Then came the call he truly feared. It was not an angry investor or a confused vendor. It was the stern professional voice of an executive loan officer from First National Bank, the primary financial institution holding the massive business loans that had funded the Gilded Apron. Richard slowly picked up the heavy receiver, his hands trembling violently. Richard, the loan officer, began skipping any polite pleasantries. "We have been closely monitoring the media coverage regarding your restaurant's grand opening. The sudden withdrawal of Sterling Vance, coupled with the severe allegations of intellectual property theft and financial mismanagement, constitute a massive, immediate breach of our lending covenants. The bank's risk assessment department has officially categorized your portfolio as toxic. We are officially executing a margin call on all outstanding business loans effective immediately. We require the full repayment of the principal balance within 48 hours. Richard felt the blood completely drain from his face, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. A margin call. It was the absolute worst-case scenario for any heavily leveraged business owner. 48 hours. Richard gasped, his voice cracking horribly. "That is completely impossible. We need time to restructure. We can hire a new executive chef. The brand name is still valuable. We can salvage the operation." The loan officer's tone remained completely cold and detached. Richard, according to the federal injunction filed last night, you do not actually own the brand name. You do not own the recipes. You own a fully equipped kitchen and a shattered reputation. The bank is not interested in restructuring a fraudulent enterprise. We are moving to aggressively secure our collateral. The word collateral hit Richard like a physical blow to the stomach. To secure the initial massive capital required to lease the prime Manhattan real estate and build the luxurious dining room, Richard had not just pledged the restaurant's future revenue. He had pledged everything he owned. He had put up the massive colonial house he was currently sitting in. He had drained his entire retirement savings, and in a move of pure, arrogant desperation, he had convinced Melanie to secretly pledge the entirety of the trust fund her late grandmother had left her. He had assured her it was just a temporary minor formality to satisfy the bank's strict risk requirements until Sterling Vance signed the check. "You cannot take the house," Richard whispered, tears of sheer terror finally spilling over his eyelashes. "My wife and I have lived here for 30 years. You cannot touch Melanie's trust fund." "You signed the legally binding documents," Richard the loan officer replied smoothly. "The collateral is officially forfeit. The bank will begin foreclosure proceedings on your personal residence by the end of the week, and we are currently freezing the trust accounts. I strongly advise you to retain bankruptcy counsel immediately." The line went completely dead, leaving Richard listening to the harsh, hollow dial tone. He slowly lowered the receiver, his mind frantically trying to process the magnitude of the disaster. He had gambled absolutely everything on Melanie's pretty face and my silent, obedient labor. He had arrogantly believed he could manipulate the entire world without facing a single consequence. Now the house of cards had spectacularly collapsed, crushing him underneath it. He stood up on shaking legs and walked out of his dark study, heading toward Melanie's bedroom. He found her curled in a tight ball, her phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. "Melanie," Richard said, his voice entirely hollow, stripped of all its former arrogant power. "We have to pack our bags. The bank just called. They are taking the house. They are taking your trust fund. We have absolutely nothing left." The words hung in the stale air of the bedroom, heavy and suffocating. Melanie stared at our father, her tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure denial. She aggressively wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara across her pale cheeks. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "No, that is completely unacceptable. We can fix this. We just need to get the kitchen running again. We just need the food to taste like it did in the pitch meetings." She grabbed her smartphone from the nightstand, her manicured fingers shaking so badly she dropped it twice before finally unlocking the screen. "I will call Sienna," Melanie declared frantically, pulling up my contact information. "She is probably just sulking in her apartment. I will tell her we are sorry. I will tell her she can come back and work the line. She always comes back when we tell her to." Richard did not stop her. In his completely desperate, financially ruined state, he actually believed my sister was right. He believed I was still the obedient, desperate scapegoat they had conditioned me to be. For the next 3 hours, my phone screen lit up relentlessly. While they were spiraling into absolute panic inside their massive, soon-to-be foreclosed colonial home, I was standing in the sunlit kitchen of my pristine Brooklyn apartment. The morning air was quiet and incredibly peaceful. I was wearing comfortable cotton sweatpants, my hair tied up in a messy bun. I was not rushing to meet wholesale vendors or stressing over separated sauces. I was methodically grinding fresh Ethiopian coffee beans, inhaling the rich, complex aroma that filled my sanctuary. I poured hot water over the grounds, watching the dark coffee bloom perfectly. I poured the steaming brew into my favorite ceramic mug, walked over to my plush velvet sofa, and finally picked up my phone. There were 47 missed calls and 8 new voicemails. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee, enjoying the perfect acidity and roasted flavor profile before tapping the screen to play the first message on speakerphone. It was Richard. The arrogant, booming voice that had banished me to the alleyway was gone. In its place was the pathetic, frantic tone of a drowning man grasping at straws. "Sienna, please pick up the phone." His recorded voice pleaded, accompanied by the sound of him pacing rapidly back and forth. You have made your point. You successfully embarrassed us. But the bank is calling in the loans today. They are threatening to take the house. We are family, Sienna. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood over a minor professional disagreement. If you just come back to the kitchen and issue a public statement saying the intellectual property dispute was a misunderstanding, we can save the restaurant. I am even willing to offer you a small percentage of the business. 5% equity. You will be a real owner. Just call me back immediately. I let out a soft, genuine laugh, shaking my head in absolute disbelief. Even facing total bankruptcy and federal fraud charges, my father still thought he held all the power. He thought offering me an insulting 5% of my own stolen company was a generous compromise. He honestly believed my Michelin-trained talent and my entire life work could be bought back with pennies on the dollar. I deleted the message and played the next one. This time it was Melanie. She was openly sobbing into the receiver, her words slurring together in a pathetic display of panic. Sienna, you have to fix this, she wailed, the sound of her crying echoing loudly in my quiet apartment. Andre actually left me. He packed his bags and walked out. Sterling Vance ruined my reputation. Every socialite in Manhattan is laughing at me on the internet. I do not know how to cook any of those dishes. You need to come back right now. I will let you run the kitchen however you want. I will not even come back there. Just cook the food and make Mr. Vance bring his check back. Please, Sienna. You owe me. I am your sister. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt or sympathy as I listened to her cry. For 33 years, I had bent over backward to shield her from the consequences of her own incompetence. I had cooked, cleaned, and sacrificed my own happiness just to earn a tiny fraction of the love they showered effortlessly onto her. But the woman sitting on that velvet sofa drinking coffee was no longer their shield. I was the architect of their long overdue consequences. I tapped the small trash can icon on the screen, permanently deleting her sobbing voice from my phone. I took another long, peaceful sip of my coffee, looking out the large window at the beautiful morning sky. They were begging for a savior, but they were speaking to a ghost. I placed the phone completely on silent, tossed it casually onto the coffee table, and opened a book. While I enjoyed my peaceful morning coffee, my father was desperately racing across town. After the devastating phone call from the bank regarding the margin call, Richard refused to simply accept his fate. His immense arrogance convinced him he could still salvage something. He left Melanie crying in her bedroom, jumped into his SUV, and drove frantically toward Manhattan. His delusional plan was to quickly secure the physical assets inside the gilded apron. He thought he could quietly liquidate the expensive commercial ovens and the Italian marble tables to appease the angry loan officers before they seized everything. He unlocked the heavy back door of the restaurant, fully expecting an empty, quiet kitchen. Instead, he was immediately hit by a solid wall of extremely putrid, suffocating odors. When Sterling Vance tore up that check the night before, the young unpaid line cooks had simply dropped whatever they were doing and walked out the door. They did not shut down the prep stations or wrap the expensive proteins. The kitchen was an absolute terrifying disaster zone. Huge chunks of expensive raw Wagyu beef were left sitting on the stainless steel counters, already turning a sickening shade of gray. Separated butter sauce had congealed into huge yellow puddles on the slippery floor. Worse still, someone had carelessly placed a leaking tray of raw chicken breasts directly above the completely open bins of fresh salad greens in the walk-in cooler, and the heavy metal door was left wide open all night long. Richard tied a silk handkerchief over his nose, gagging at the horrible smell of rotting seafood and spoiled dairy. He frantically started grabbing large trash bags, trying to hide the incredible mess before anyone saw it. But his desperate cleanup effort was violently interrupted by the loud ringing of the front doorbell. He froze, hoping whoever it was would just go away. The doorbell rang again, followed by loud, authoritative knocking on the thick glass. Richard cautiously walked through the dark dining room and peered out. Standing on the sidewalk was a stern man in a crisp uniform holding a metal clipboard. It was an official from the New York City Health Department. I had made a very brief anonymous phone call earlier that morning while my coffee was brewing. I knew exactly how incredibly lazy Melanie amateur cooks were, and I knew they would completely abandon the kitchen the second the money dried up. I simply informed the city that a massive biohazard was currently festering inside an empty, unstaffed commercial property. Richard cracked the front door open, his heart pounding erratically against his ribs. "We are closed for private renovations today," Richard lied smoothly to him. "Please come back next month." The inspector did not smile. He pushed the heavy glass door open, forcing Richard to step backward. "My name is Inspector Davis," he stated firmly, holding up his official badge. "We received a highly detailed emergency tip regarding severe health code violations and abandoned food at this exact address. I am conducting an immediate unannounced inspection. If you attempt to obstruct my entry, I will return with the police." Richard stood completely paralyzed as Inspector Davis marched directly past him and pushed through the swinging metal doors into the kitchen. The inspector immediately stopped, pulling a digital thermometer and a bright flashlight from his utility belt. He aimed the beam into the dark corners of the greasy, unwashed floor. "This is absolutely catastrophic," Inspector Davis muttered frantically, making notes on his clipboard. He pointed his flashlight at the raw chicken juices dripping onto the uncovered vegetables. "You have massive cross-contamination. The ambient temperature of this walk-in cooler is 60 degrees. You have thousands of dollars of raw protein breeding deadly bacteria." Richard tried to explain that the staff had abruptly quit, but the inspector held up his hand, demanding absolute silence. "I do not care about your staffing issues," Davis snapped sharply. "I care about public safety. Operating a kitchen in this abhorrent condition is a severe criminal violation. You are incredibly lucky no one ate this contaminated garbage last night." Inspector Davis pulled a thick pad of official stickers from his clipboard. He peeled off a massive bright red sign with the word "Closed" printed in bold white letters. He walked past my trembling father, pushed the front doors open, and slapped the red notice directly onto the center of the glass entrance. It covered the gold leaf lettering of the restaurant name. "You are officially shut down," Davis announced coldly. "You cannot enter the premises except for authorized cleaning, and you are facing massive municipal fines." The gilded apron was entirely dead, and everyone passing by now knew it. The bright red sticker from the health department blocked the sunlight from entering the dark dining room. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the foul smell leaking from the kitchen and the overwhelming stench of complete failure. Richard had locked the front doors after Inspector Davis left, plunging the restaurant into heavy shadows. The beautiful crystal chandeliers hung above them like dead glass. Richard sat heavily at table 4, where Sterling Vance had destroyed their future just hours ago. Melanie sat across from him, her silk gown now wrinkled and smelling of stale sweat. She had finally stopped crying. "We need to sell the ovens," Richard muttered, his voice hoarse and completely stripped of its usual arrogant authority. "We have 6 commercial-grade convection ovens back there. They are brand new. If we call a liquidator today, we can maybe get 50 cents on the dollar. It will not cover the bank margin call, but it might pay for a decent bankruptcy lawyer." Melanie stared blankly at the mahogany table. "We cannot sell the ovens, Dad. The health inspector said we cannot go back into the kitchen. And besides, the bank technically owns the equipment. It was purchased with the business loan. If we sell it, that is stealing from the bank." Richard slammed his fist against the table, making Melanie flinch violently. "I am not going to federal prison because of some technicality," he hissed, his eyes wide and frantic. "We will rent a truck tonight. We will load the equipment in the dark. By the time the bank audits the inventory, we will say the staff stole it when they quit. We just need cash right now to survive." His desperate, highly illegal scheming was abruptly interrupted by a sharp knock on the front glass door. Richard froze, his eyes darting toward the entrance. Through the thick glass next to the glaring red closed sign stood a man in a plain gray suit, holding a thick manila envelope. Richard felt his stomach drop. He thought it was the police coming to arrest him for health code violations, or perhaps the bank auditors arriving early. "Do not move," Richard whispered harshly to Melanie. "Do not make a single sound. Maybe he will just leave." But the man did not leave. He knocked harder, the heavy rapping echoing loudly through the empty, silent dining room. "I can see you sitting in there, Richard," the man called out, his voice muffled but entirely clear through the glass. "Open the door, or I will have the building management override the locks." Richard slowly stood up, his legs shaking violently. He walked across the Italian marble floor, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. He reached the front entrance, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy glass door open just a few inches. "Who are you?" Richard demanded weakly, keeping his body positioned to block the entrance. The man did not introduce himself. He simply shoved the thick manila envelope through the narrow gap directly into Richard's chest. Richard instinctively grabbed the heavy package to keep it from hitting the floor. "You have been officially served," the man stated in a bored, flat, monotone voice. "Have a terrible day." The man turned around and walked down the Manhattan sidewalk, disappearing into the crowd. Richard stood in the doorway, staring down at the thick envelope in his shaking hands. He slowly closed the glass door and locked it again. Melanie walked up behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling with fresh panic. "Is it from the bank?" Richard did not answer immediately. He tore open the top of the envelope and pulled out a stack of crisp, white legal documents. He flipped to the first page, his eyes frantically scanning the dense, bold text. His face, already pale from the morning disasters, turned completely white. "It is not the bank," Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. "It is an immediate eviction notice." Melanie gasped, snatching the paper from his hands. "How can we be evicted? We signed a 10-year commercial lease. We paid the first 6 months of rent in cash up front." Richard leaned against the cold glass door, completely defeated. "The property management company invoked the morality clause in the contract," he explained hollowly. "Operating a fraudulent enterprise, losing our health certification, and the public spectacle from last night completely breached the lease agreement. The property owner officially terminated the contract this morning. We do not have 30 days. We do not even have a week. The document says we have to vacate entirely by 5 o'clock this evening, or we will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Criminal trespassing. Richard repeated the phrase aloud, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Then a sudden violent surge of adrenaline overtook his initial shock. He threw the heavy glass door open, not caring that the bright red health department sticker tore straight down the middle. He ran out onto the cold Manhattan sidewalk, his dress shoes slapping loudly against the concrete. "Hey!" he screamed at the back of the retreating process server. "You come back here right now. There is a massive mistake. Who bought this building? Who is the new property management company? You cannot just terminate a commercial lease without a proper court hearing. I will sue the new owner for millions." The man in the gray suit did not even break his stride. He simply raised a hand over his shoulder and kept walking until he disappeared around the corner. Richard stood on the curb, his chest heaving, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Melanie hovered nervously in the doorway, too terrified to step outside into the harsh afternoon light. Then the low, powerful purr of a luxury engine cut through the ambient street noise. A sleek midnight black town car glided smoothly to a stop directly in front of the restaurant, right where Richard was standing. The tinted rear window remained rolled up. For a split second, Richard delusionally thought Sterling Vance had returned to negotiate. He took a hopeful step forward, his arrogant posture returning slightly. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. I stepped out of the vehicle. I did not look anything like the exhausted, flower-covered girl they had verbally abused and banished to the back alley less than 24 hours ago. I was wearing a tailored emerald green wool coat over a sharp black cashmere turtleneck paired with pristine leather boots. My hair was blown out perfectly, and my makeup was completely flawless. I looked exactly like the wealthy, sophisticated CEO Melanie had so desperately pretended to be. David, my corporate attorney, stepped out of the car right behind me, holding a slim leather briefcase. two massive private security guards stepped out of a trailing black SUV, taking their positions flanking me on the sidewalk. Richard staggered backward, his mouth falling open in sheer disbelief. "Sienna," he breathed, his eyes darting frantically between my expensive coat, the formidable lawyer, and the towering security guards. "What are you doing here? Did you come to help us clean out the kitchen? Did you bring cash?" Melanie finally crept out of the doorway, wrapping her arms around herself. "Sienna, thank God," she whined, her voice nasal and pathetic. "You have to talk to the property manager. They just served us an eviction notice. We are losing everything." I did not rush to comfort my crying sister. I did not cower under my father's intense stare. I stood perfectly still on the Manhattan pavement, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The power dynamic that had defined our entire lives had just permanently shifted, and I was going to savor every single second of it. I slowly took off my leather driving gloves, slipping them into my coat pocket. "I am not here to help you clean your rotting kitchen, Richard," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly over the street noise. "And I certainly did not bring you any cash. You stole enough of my money when you secretly siphoned the business loan to buy Melanie her designer wardrobe." Richard's face flushed with sudden defensive anger. He took a threatening step toward me, but the two security guards immediately stepped forward, creating an impenetrable human wall between us. Richard stopped instantly, his false bravado crumbling under the threat of physical force. "How do you know about the wardrobe?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a nervous hiss. "Did Andre talk to you?" I crossed my arms, looking at the man who had treated me like a disposable appliance for my entire life. "Andre is a man of incredible integrity," I replied smoothly. "He realized he was surrounded by financial parasites, and he did the only logical thing. He completely cut you off, just like I did." Richard pointed a shaking finger at me. "You ruined us," he yelled, drawing the attention of passing pedestrians. "You sent that lying email to Vance. You caused this entire disaster. If you had just stayed in the kitchen and kept your mouth shut, we would have $7 million right now. You are a vindictive, selfish child. You do not care that your family is thrown onto the street." I looked directly into his panicked eyes. I felt absolutely no pity. "I cared exactly as much as you cared when you plotted to steal my company and erase my name from my own menu," I answered coldly. "But you are slightly confused about one specific detail, Richard. I am not just a spectator watching you get thrown out onto the street today. I am the one actively throwing you out." Richard stared at me, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his eyes darting back to the bright red closed sign on the glass door. "The property management company evicted us. You do not have the authority to throw anyone out. You are just a cook." "David." My attorney stepped forward, opening his slim leather briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy watermarked paper and held it up for Richard to clearly see. "My client is much more than a cook," David stated, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority. "Your original lease agreement contained a standard change of ownership clause, Richard. The previous landlord was highly motivated to sell the property after seeing the public relations disaster your family caused last night. The building was officially purchased this morning at 9 o'clock in a rapid all-cash transaction." Richard's eyes scanned the official document in David's hands. He saw the seal of the city and the bold print confirming the transfer of the commercial deed. His gaze slowly moved down to the new registered owner of the property. The text clearly read, "Ironclad Culinary, LLC," the exact same company name listed on the cease and desist order I had sent to Sterling Vance. "You bought the building," Richard whispered, his voice completely devoid of air. "That is impossible. This is prime Manhattan commercial real estate. The asking price was over $5 million. You do not have that kind of capital. You spent your savings developing the menu." Melanie let out a loud, dramatic gasp, stepping closer to read the document over Richard's shoulder. "Where did you get $5 million, Sienna?" she demanded, her tone shifting from desperate victim back to entitled brat. "If you had that kind of money hidden away, you should have given it to the family." I smiled a genuine, completely unbothered expression. I did not have $5 million hidden under my mattress, Melanie. But Sterling Vance certainly did. The mention of the billionaire investor caused Richard to physically flinch. "You went to Vance?" Richard asked, sheer panic completely overtaking his face. "I did not go to him," I corrected smoothly. "He came directly to me. After he tore up your fraudulent check and walked out of your ruined dining room last night, he immediately contacted my legal team. Mr. Vance is an incredibly shrewd businessman. He realized the menu concept and the trademarked brand were absolutely brilliant. He also realized the only defective element of the entire operation was the incompetent management team trying to steal it. So he offered a new partnership. Sterling Vance provided the massive capital to purchase the physical building outright, and Ironclad Culinary LLC holds the majority equity. We are completely equal partners, which makes me your new landlord." Richard looked like he was about to collapse right there on the concrete sidewalk. His entire reality was shattering into millions of irreparable pieces. "You cannot do this to us!" he pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "The bank is foreclosing on our house." "They froze Melanie Trust Fund. If you throw us out of this restaurant, we have absolutely no way to generate revenue. We will be completely homeless. You have to let us stay. We will work for you. I will manage the front of the house, and Melanie can be a hostess. We are blood Sienna. You cannot just leave your own family with nothing." Melanie began crying again, loud, ugly sobs that echoed down the busy street. "Please, Sienna," she begged, tears ruining her face. "I am so sorry I told you to remake the sauce. I am sorry I took the credit. Just let us keep the restaurant. I will never bother you in the kitchen again. I promise." I looked at the two of them, pathetic and completely broken, begging for mercy they never once extended to me. For decades, they had systematically dismantled my self-esteem, exploiting my talent to fund their luxurious delusions. They expected me to remain their silent, obedient servant forever. But the cycle of abuse was officially terminated. I took a step closer to them, my posture rigid and my tone completely unforgiving. "You made your choice last night when you told me I was entirely unpresentable for high society," I said coldly. "You wanted me to stay hidden in the kitchen. Well, the kitchen is currently condemned by the health department, and I am the property owner locking the doors. You have exactly 30 minutes to go inside, collect your personal coats, and vacate my building. If you are still standing on this property at 5 o'clock, my security team will forcefully remove you, and I will personally press criminal trespassing charges." David checked his expensive silver watch. 29 minutes, Richard the lawyer stated flatly. "I suggest you start walking." Richard stared at David, then at the massive security guards, finally realizing that no amount of smooth talking or arrogant bullying was going to save him this time. The absolute finality in my lawyer's voice completely shattered whatever delusional hope my father had left clinging to his chest. His shoulders slumped forward, completely defeated, and he turned slowly back toward the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. Melanie followed closely behind him, her shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic sobs. I signaled for my two private security guards to follow them inside, ensuring they did not try to destroy any of the expensive property on their way out. I walked in right behind them, stepping over the threshold of the empire I had built with my own hands, now officially returning to my absolute control. The moment we entered the dark dining room, the foul, putrid stench from the abandoned kitchen hit us like a physical wall. Melanie gagged, covering her nose with the sleeve of her ruined designer gown. I did not even flinch. That smell was the undeniable scent of their complete incompetence. I stood near the mahogany hostess stand, folding my arms across my emerald green coat, and watched my father frantically scramble toward the back office. He was no longer the imposing patriarch of a wealthy family. He looked exactly like a panicked rat on a rapidly sinking ship. A few minutes later, Richard emerged from the hallway, struggling to carry two heavy cardboard wine boxes. I could hear the distinct clinking of thick glass bottles inside. He was sweating profusely, making a desperate beeline straight for the front exit. Stop right there, Richard, I commanded, my voice echoing sharply in the empty, silent room. The two security guards immediately stepped directly into his path, blocking the doors. Richard halted, his face flushing with angry red blotches. "These are from my private vintage wine collection," he snapped defensively, clutching the heavy cardboard boxes tighter to his chest. "I paid for these myself. They are Chateau Margaux, and they are worth over $10,000. You cannot legally keep my personal property, Sienna." I looked at David, who simply opened his leather briefcase and pulled out another sheet of paper. "Actually, Richard," David corrected smoothly, adjusting his wire glasses. "According to the commercial lease agreement you signed, any and all inventory stored on these premises is subject to immediate seizure by the property owner in the event of a catastrophic breach of contract. Furthermore, since your bank is currently calling in the business loans, those assets are legally frozen. If you walk out that door with $10,000 worth of wine, I will have the police arrest you for grand larceny before you even reach the end of the block." Richard's jaw dropped. He looked down at the boxes of expensive wine, his knuckles turning white from his tight grip. He wanted to fight, but he knew David was absolutely right. He was completely trapped. With a heavy, agonizing groan of defeat, Richard slowly lowered the heavy boxes onto a nearby dining table. He stared at the vintage bottles, realizing he was leaving behind the last valuable thing he could have sold to save himself. While Richard was surrendering the wine, Melanie walked out of the back office carrying a large plastic bin. She had piled it high with expensive crystal desk ornaments, a silver espresso machine from the break room, and a brand new laptop computer. "Put the electronics and the appliances back, Melanie," I instructed coldly, not even raising my voice. "Those items were purchased using the small business loan. They belong to the restaurant infrastructure, which now belongs to my holding company. You are only permitted to take your personal clothing and family photographs. Everything else stays exactly where it is." Melanie let out a loud, frustrated shriek, completely losing her temper. "You are a monster," she screamed, her voice cracking wildly. "You are taking everything from us. You are leaving us with nothing." I looked at her, taking in her smeared makeup and her ruined $4,000 dress. "I am taking back what you actively tried to steal from me," I replied evenly. "You wanted to play the role of a ruthless corporate CEO, Melanie. Well, this is exactly what a ruthless corporate acquisition looks like. Put the laptop back on the desk," crying hysterically. Melanie dumped the plastic bin onto the floor. She pulled out a few framed pictures and her expensive designer makeup bag, shoving them carelessly into a dirty cardboard box she found near the trash cans. The stark contrast between her arrogant entrance the night before and her pathetic, messy exit today was incredibly poetic. As they gathered their meager personal belongings, a man in a sturdy canvas jacket walked through the front doors, carrying a heavy toolbox. It was the commercial locksmith I had hired. He did not ask any questions. He walked straight past my ruined family, pulled out a heavy power drill, and immediately began drilling the brass locks out of the front doors. The loud grinding noise of the metal drill filled the dark restaurant, serving as the perfect soundtrack to their absolute destruction. Richard flinched at the harsh sound, watching the metal shavings fall to the Italian marble floor. The locks were changing. His access was permanently revoked. The ultimate checkmate was physically manifesting right in front of his eyes. I stood perfectly still, watching them carry their pathetic cardboard boxes toward the exit, stripped of all their stolen luxury and unearned arrogance. I stood perfectly still, watching them carry their boxes toward the exit. As Richard reached for the heavy glass door, the finality of the moment shattered Melanie completely. She stopped, letting her dirty cardboard box slip from her trembling fingers. It hit the floor, spilling her framed photographs across the stone. She did not bend down to pick them up. She spun around to face me, contorted in pure, desperate rage. "You cannot do this to your sister," Melanie shrieked over the grinding drill. "You are entirely heartless, Sienna. We share the same blood. How can you stand there looking so smug while my life falls apart? I just lost my husband. I am losing my home. Now you are throwing me onto the street. You are supposed to protect your family." Richard turned back, sensing an opportunity to pile on guilt. He pointed his finger at me. "Your mother will be devastated when she hears what you have done," Richard warned. You are destroying this family over a business dispute. You will be entirely alone in this world. No one trusts a woman who backstabs her blood for a paycheck. I listened to their desperate chorus without blinking. I did not feel the guilt they weaponized against me for 3 decades. I felt nothing but cold clarity. I walked toward them until I was standing just a few feet away from my crying sister. Do not use the word family to manipulate me again. I stated, my voice devoid of emotion but sharp enough to cut glass. Family is supposed to nurture you. Family should celebrate your achievements and protect your spirit. What you ran in that colonial house was not a family. It was a toxic transaction. I was unpaid labor, and Melanie was the shiny product you bought with my sweat. You did not care about my blood when you wrote me out of the operating agreement. You did not care about my future when you pledged the restaurant assets to pay your gambling debts, Richard. And you did not care about my feelings, Melanie, when you strutted into my kitchen wearing a dress paid for by my hard work and told me to remake a perfect sauce just to stroke your massive ego. Melanie wiped her nose, looking away from my piercing gaze. We were just so stressed, she mumbled weakly. We were trying to secure funding for all of us. I let out a harsh, cold laugh. You were trying to secure the spotlight for yourself. You thought I was completely stupid. You thought I would endlessly absorb your abuse because I craved your toxic approval. You made one fatal miscalculation last night. You looked me in the eye, the woman who built this entire empire from scratch, and you told me to stay in the kitchen. You told me I was unpresentable. I stepped closer, forcing her to look at me. Well, look at me now, Melanie. I am standing in the main dining room. I hold the deed, and I am the sole CEO of this brand. You banished me to the alley, so I bought the block. My boundaries are set in concrete. You will never step foot in my restaurant again. You will never take credit for my talent again. And I am officially cutting you out of my life forever. I turned to David, who was quietly watching the exchange. How much time do they have left? I asked my attorney. David checked his watch. Exactly 2 minutes, he replied flatly. I looked back at Richard and Melanie. You heard the man. You had exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate my property today, and 28 of those minutes are already gone. Pick up your pathetic boxes and get out immediately. If you are still inside this building when that locksmith finishes installing the new deadbolt, my security team will physically drag you out to the curb and the police will be called. Richard just stared at me, his arrogant spirit finally and completely broken. He knew I was absolutely serious. He slowly bent down, picked up Melanie's spilled belongings, and shoved them back into her dirty box. He handed it to her, grabbed his own box, and pushed open the heavy glass door. The cold Manhattan wind immediately swept into the dining room. Melanie walked out first. Her shoulders slumped, sobbing uncontrollably as she stepped onto the unforgiving concrete sidewalk. Richard followed her, not daring to look back at me. As the glass door swung shut behind them, the locksmith pulled his drill away from the metal frame. The broken old locks fell to the hard floor, useless and discarded. They were finally out in the freezing cold, and my restaurant was entirely mine again. 6 months later, the freezing winter wind had given way to a warm, vibrant Manhattan spring, and the physical space that used to hold my family's toxic delusions was completely unrecognizable. I had ordered the construction crews to strip the interior down to the bare studs. We ripped out the gaudy gold leaf, the heavy, suffocating velvet drapes, and the pretentious crystal chandeliers that Richard had insisted on. In their place, I built a restaurant that reflected actual culinary authenticity. We exposed the original red brick walls, installed warm ambient lighting with brushed copper fixtures, and brought in custom dining tables made from reclaimed natural wood. I completely demolished the solid walls separating the dining room from the kitchen. I replaced it with a massive expanse of crystal-clear, soundproof glass. I was never going to be hidden away in a dark back room ever again. The new restaurant, simply named Maison Sienna, was absolutely thriving. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slow night in the hospitality industry, but our dining room was packed to absolute capacity. The atmosphere was completely different from the stiff, uncomfortable tension of that disastrous grand opening. The room was filled with the low, joyful hum of genuine conversation, the clinking of fine wine glasses, and the intoxicating aroma of perfectly executed French cuisine. There were no hired press photographers flashing cameras in people's faces, and there were certainly no fraudulent CEOs making ridiculous speeches. There was only incredible food and impeccable service. I stood at the center of my pristine, newly designed kitchen, wearing a crisp, custom-tailored chef coat with my name proudly embroidered in dark green thread over my heart. I was no longer a sweaty, exhausted prisoner of my family's greed. I was the absolute master of my domain. The brigade of young, highly trained chefs I had personally hired moved around me with quiet, efficient precision. They respected me because I respected them, and together we were executing the dinner service flawlessly. I wiped the rim of a porcelain plate, adding a final delicate garnish of microgreens to a perfectly seared duck breast resting on a bed of sweet potato puree, and slid it smoothly onto the pass. "Order up table 12, I called out, my voice steady and commanding. A server immediately picked up the plate and moved swiftly out into the dining room. I took a deep, satisfying breath, wiping my hands on my clean apron. As I turned to check the tickets for the next course, the heavy wooden door of the back office swung open. Andre walked into the kitchen holding a sleek, digital tablet. He looked completely revitalized. The heavy, exhausted bags under his eyes from his time dealing with my father were entirely gone. He was wearing a sharp, modern gray suit with no tie, projecting a relaxed, effortless confidence. The divorce from Melanie had been finalized 2 months ago, and shedding the dead weight of my toxic family had clearly done wonders for his spirit. Andre was no longer just a numbers guy pushed into the shadows. When Sterling Vance and I officially formed our new partnership, my very first executive decision was to hire Andre as the Chief Financial Officer of Ironclad Culinary LLC. He was given full control over the budget, the payroll, and the strategic financial planning with zero interference from egomaniacal owners. "We are running exactly 12% above our projected revenue targets for the quarter," Andre announced, a genuine bright smile spreading across his face as he walked up to the pass. He tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up a detailed graph. "And the food costs are perfectly optimized. You really nailed the sourcing contracts with the local upstate farm Sienna. The margins on the new spring vegetable tasting menu are incredible." I smiled back at him, leaning against the cool stainless steel counter. "I told you bringing the sourcing in-house was the right move. We do not need a middleman when we have direct relationships with the growers. Have you checked the reservation books for next month yet?" Andre chuckled, sliding the tablet onto the counter. "We are completely booked solid through August. There is a waitlist stretching over 300 names long. Vance called me an hour ago. He said the board of directors is absolutely ecstatic with the first quarter returns. He is already floating the idea of scouting a second location in London next year, but I told him we need to focus on perfecting this flagship location first." "You made the right call," I agreed, nodding firmly. "We are not rushing anything. We are building this empire the right way with patience, integrity, and absolute quality control. No shortcuts." Andre looked through the massive glass window out into the glowing, happy dining room. He watched a table of guests laugh out loud as a server poured them a beautiful vintage wine. "We really did it, Sienna," he said quietly, his voice filled with profound gratitude. "We walked out of the fire and built something beautiful." I looked out at the dining room, then back at my incredibly talented, hardworking staff. I thought about Richard and Melanie, wherever they were, now completely banished from the world they tried to steal. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt incredibly free. "We certainly did, Andre," I replied, picking up my plating tweezers to start the next dish. "Now let us get back to work. We have a highly profitable dinner service to finish." While I plated the next masterpiece, my thoughts briefly drifted to the people who once tried to bury me. The universe has a remarkably efficient way of balancing the scales. Richard did not escape the financial ruin he built. The bank took the colonial house, the luxury cars, and every single cent of his fraudulent capital. Today, the man who once demanded a $7 million investment check sits in a dreary, windowless cubicle in New Jersey. He works as a middle management data entry clerk for a mid-sized logistics firm. He takes orders from supervisors half his age wearing cheap off-the-rack suits, completely stripped of his arrogant power. He spends his days punching numbers into spreadsheets, a fitting prison for a man who only ever valued people for their financial utility. Melanie experienced an equally severe reality check. Without Richard's stolen money or Andre's financial stability, her glittering socialite status dissolved overnight. The wealthy friends she desperately tried to impress abandoned her the exact second the scandal hit the internet. She was forced to sell her remaining designer gowns and crystal shoes just to afford the security deposit on a tiny, cramped studio apartment deep in the outer boroughs. There are no cameras there. There are no VIP tables. She finally has to live in the real world entirely alone, forced to look in the mirror and face the empty, talentless reflection staring back at her. They tried to build a castle on my back, and now they are permanently buried under the rubble of their own hubris. I handed the finished plates to the waiting servers and wiped my station clean. The dinner rush was finally slowing down the chaotic energy of the kitchen, settling into a rhythmic, satisfying hum. I untied my apron, the exact same motion I made on that fateful night 6 months ago, but this time it was a symbol of completion, not surrender. I walked out from behind the glass wall and stepped into the softly lit dining room. The guests were finishing their desserts, their faces glowing with genuine satisfaction. I looked directly into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, speaking directly to anyone out there who might be listening in the dark. There is a dangerous myth society forces down our throats from the moment we are born. The myth that blood is an unbreakable bond. We are taught to endure disrespect, exploitation, and profound cruelty simply because the people inflicting it happen to share our last name. We are conditioned to shrink ourselves so toxic family members can feel incredibly large. But let me tell you the absolute truth. Blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and mutual growth make you a true family. If the people sitting at your dinner table are deliberately starving your spirit just to feed their own selfish egos, you are legally and morally allowed to get up and walk entirely away from that table. You do not owe anyone your sanity. You do not owe your abusers your talent. The greatest revenge you can ever achieve is not found in screaming matches or bitter arguments. The greatest revenge is absolute, undeniable competence. When they look you in the eye and tell you to stay in the shadows, you step directly into the light and completely blind them with your brilliance. You build your skills quietly in the dark. You master your craft until you become completely indispensable. Because when you possess genuine, undeniable skill, no one can ever steal your foundation. They can take the physical money, they can take the buildings, but they can never take what is locked securely inside your mind. I chose to cut the dead weight. I chose to build my own table from scratch, and I surrounded myself with a chosen family who genuinely respects my hustle and entirely matches my integrity. Look closely at the people standing in your corner today. If they are not actively helping you build your empire, they are quietly waiting to steal your bricks. Stop handing your hard-earned bricks to people who do not know how to build a damn thing. Protect your peace, protect your talent, and never ever let anyone tell you to stay hidden in the kitchen. If this story resonated with you, if you are truly ready to stop shrinking and start building your own empire, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who desperately needs the strength to walk away from their own toxic table today. The kitchen is officially open, and it is time for you to become the executive chef of your own life.